How's it going? My talk's going to be a little bit different from other people's in that there's not really any social implications and it's not about stuff in the future. It's kind of just like a kid's show and tell of old stuff. So, where should I start? About 6 months ago, I was visiting my grandparents in Germany, and my Opa was telling me a story about a boat. And I don't know how it came up in conversation. He was saying, so there was a boat and it was travelling through the river and it would sort of pull itself up along a chain. So I said, oh, like a ferry. I said, no, it went along the river. I was like, what do you mean, along the river? Like a really long chain? He's like, yeah, that's right, it was 200 kilometres long. And I was like, bullshit. There's no fucking way you can have a 200 kilometre long chain and a boat going along a river. So the natural thing to do was to Google it. So I literally Googled Kettenship and Neckar, which is the river that he was talking about. And the first hit was a Wikipedia article all about this particular ship. And I'm basically just replicating that Wikipedia article because I couldn't find anything else in it. Alright. So, I can't see anything from here. This is the boat. So you can see there's a chain coming up out of the water at the front, and it's pulling a whole bunch of stuff along. And there's a bunch of booze trees in the background, and that's about all I can really see in that. So the way it works is it's pretty simple. It just pulls on a chain, and it's got a very simple steam engine. And so I was really confused. Why would you do this? Why would you go to all the expense of making a really long chain, which is difficult to do, instead of just having a paddle or something like that? And it basically turns out that the steam engines they had were really low pressure, so they weren't strong enough to push up the river. So if you had a boat with a screw, like a propeller or a paddle, it would just sink down the river. Okay, so where the green arrow is where my grandparents live. They live in this little tiny village, and they're kind of like the historians of their village. They've even written a book about like the whole region and like family trees and all that kind of stuff. So they know heaps about how stuff used to be, and a lot of it I think is probably not recorded. So it's pretty interesting when they talk about how things used to be. So you can see Heilbronn down in that bottom corner is where one end of the ship was, and then all the way at the other end is Mannheim. So 200 kilometres of chain. So they've basically got blacksmiths to make really long chains, and then they'd dump one end in the river and they'd pin them together with sort of locks, so you could undo the chain to put a boat in or out. And one of the other interesting things about it that he talked about was that it made a really, really loud noise, and that Mark Twain wrote something about it. So even more confused at this point, just before I Googled it. And it turns out it's true. So there's, on the Wikipedia thing, there's a little thing from Mark Twain saying he looked out of his hotel room in Heidelberg, which is along the route, and he saw this boat and he couldn't understand how it worked because it didn't have a paddle and it didn't have a propeller, but he knew that it made a shitload of noise and it was like a really loud screeching. I can't really go back to the map, but apparently on the next valley over, you could hear the ship. So that's like 10 to 15 k's away, you can hear the ship. When was this? Let me just check my notes. So the first one was in 1878, and then in 1930, the government basically decided they were going to put locks on the river, and that basically means you can't have a chain boat. And they had steam engines that were good at the time, so they could have a proper ship. So yeah, they all basically died because the government decided to change the rules on them. So you can see that little one there where it says Neckar, that's 200 k's. So you can see how some of these were ridiculously long. Like that's a super long piece of metal just linked together with just basic tools. That's all they had was steel. And the French came up with the idea. What else do I want to talk about? I think that's about it. Another picture. Yeah, short and sweet. Any questions? Yes.